Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, all colleagues in this honorable House, staff of government ministries, especially those in the Ministry of Finance who have worked tirelessly to produce these national budgets. Thank you all for your commitment to work and to Guyana. Citizens of Guyana, here we are once again, another budget. Actually, before I continue, I do want to salute the students that are visiting with us today and those that were here in the last couple of days. And I want to give them my utmost regrets. You would not have seen us in this house at our best, and for that I say sorry. Mr. Speaker, I want to get all that we in this house should be ashamed of out of the way. Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday of this week, the usual noises that emanate the room when I'm speaking ensured that they heard the vilest of derogatory remarks at my colleague and friend, MP Jurita Finance, a strong indigenous Guyanese woman willing to answer the call to serve her country. Mr. Speaker, 4 days later, we've had no public apology extended to Ms. Finance. I want all Guyana and the world to know that this is now the norm for some members in this House. And this is confirmation of exactly what I am talking about. But you know that the empty vessel makes the most noise, and we must avoid loud and aggressive persons. Mr. Speaker, 4 days later, as I was saying, we've had no public apology extended to Ms. Finance. I want all Guyana and the world to know that this is now the norm for some members in this House. I want to ask this PPP government, especially the women MP sitting on the other side of the House, to say, did you hear the abuses extended to the Honorable Jurita? You are consistent in your silence, and as individuals, you have failed to stand up when it counts, and when it comes to speaking out against gender abuse, gender violence in this National Assembly. This Honorable House at the highest level has not said no to this. It has not said no, this is not what we stand for all Guyanese women and to the world. The silence from men who have daughters and who should know better has been deafening. But let's keep waiting for the apology. All of this has shaped the deplorable tone in this House, which we're seeing in the current performance. Mr. Speaker, this honorable House and this nation, by extension, has been fed a diet of falsehoods regarding who's to be blamed for the underdevelopment and where we stand in this country. But let's look at the facts. 32 years have passed since 1992 and the so-called return to the democracy. Of those 32 years, the current opposition was in office for only 5 years. Only 3 years elapsed before the no-confidence motion of 2018. This opposition, therefore, was in office for a mere 16% of, let's call it, the last 31 years, and allowed to govern ostensibly for only 3 years, 10% of time in a society which has always been ethnically divided. Mr. Speaker, let it be known Let us remind the people of Guyana that 84% of the last 31 years, the PPP have been in government exclusively and exclusionarily. Let us be honest, this government has consistently and persistently refused to entertain any discussion involving the opposition in the future planning and development of the country. It has effectively closed the door to the involvement and participation of 50% of the country in the governance of this country. The preparation of this budget and all the budgets between 1992 and 2015, and since 2020, have faced this challenge, a dangerous road for any racially divided country to tread. After 26 years out of the 31 or 32 years of being in government, the PPP side members on this side of the House still want to blame the opposition for the lack of progress, the garbage on the streets, the poor maths and English results. This is the fact, it is a fact, that not one hinterland school could get a grade 1 in 2020, as posted on the Ministry of Education website itself. Now let us look at those hinterland results. In 2016, hinterland grade 1 passes for hinterland and riverine communities by year. In 2016, only 2%. 2017, 1%. 2018, 1%. 2019, 0%. 2020, 2%. 2021, 1%. And 2022, 0%. After 25 years in government, and 25 years of responsibility for education in the hinterland, 0% of hinterland students in Guyana and the riverine areas could muster a grade 1 pass, while their compatriots on the coast were boasting 21 and 22 grade 1s. If that is not apartheid in education, I do not know what is. Mr. Speaker, my concern is that this budget does nothing to directly impact that challenge. I had hoped that this year, this budget, there would be some buzz permeating in this dear land of Guyana. The excitement of being, as they say, the fastest growing economy in the world. But as I passed the corner of Camp and Church Street, the two old ladies bent over in pain, begging, were still on the road, right opposite our premier investment office going west. Somehow, I thought that they would have received support from the previous budgets that would have taken them off the streets. But here they were. Mr. Speaker, again, this budget does not help them. And the question is, who in Guyana sees them? Continuing along Camp Street, I passed with pride past the spanking new St. Rose's High School. And congratulations to the Minister of Education on that and the other schools. I recall the challenging early stages of its development. But as you cast your eyes opposite, any time of the day or night, right opposite St. Rose's High School, you will see the filth-ridden pieces of cardboard, the thinning, broken bodies of fellow Guyanese, lying, sitting, crying among flakes of burnt-out charcoal and pieces of wood, strewn together as they create a fire and a pot to eat. Yes, Mr. Speaker, in the new Dubai of Guyana, that Guyana is supposed to be today, who in the PPP government sees them? On my way home 8 hours later, after the howling and screaming, which constitutes a budget debate, as we're hearing now, I lament my weary eyes, damaged ears, and the ever-increasing despair. I glance to the left, the opposite side of the penitence market, and see the sea of hopelessness. Those forced to make concrete pavements a home burst into sight. The nakedness and despair are there for all of us to see. I ask the most honorable Minister of Finance, is this the best that this budget can do for them? Do you see them? Is this how we stay the course and build prosperity for all? Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate to recall that yesterday the Minister of Social Protection was lamenting that only 35 persons were at the night shelter when they were entered government in 2020. Since when is today's 100% increase in the occupants at the night shelter something to celebrate? Only in Guyana under the PPP would we celebrate an increase in homelessness that drives our citizens to a night shelter. Mr. Speaker, the crux of the matter, as they would say, and my concerns regarding Budget 24 are all of these things. It is not the infantile allegations that we on this side of the House don't want development, don't want progress, don't want schools with good teachers for our precious children, don't want nurses when we go to the hospital. What would that be? We let this our country too. This is our home too. The issue is that woman, the poor, those that Guyana have failed to educate for decades, the youth teeming with excitement and a zest for life, the UG students living with a chronic physical or mental disability. This budget is about all of them, about all of us, and guarantee that peace in this fastest growing economy, Dubai style pie that we profess to be baking. Mr. Speaker, the allocation in these budgets do not address these grave concerns, and that's the problem. The 2024 budget is best described as increasing poverty. It is a shameless and disgraceful allocation of
Honorable MP, I allow the first
my apologies, Mr. Speaker.
but you give me a double here.
Apologies, Mr. Speaker, I withdraw. It is an unfortunate allocation of Guyana's patrimony to the kith and king of the PPP elite, primarily to contractors that support the PPP. In this sand and stone budget, as mentioned by my colleague, Hemraj Ramjatan, it is clear, and I say sand and stone because there's no care and there's no feeling and there's no consideration. And it has a particular bias against the poor and working class. Let me turn to the convoluted and lopsided budget. There are multiple areas that stun rational reasoning, and here are a few of them. And these are the things that terrorize the minds of the poor, working class, and the elderly. A budget of 1.15 trillion with 2.7 billion allocated for 76,000 pensioners. That includes a paltry $3,000 increase for each pensioners. The 76,000 pensioners make up approximately 10.5% of Guyana's population. The 2024 budget is a 46.6% increase over the 2023 budget, and real GDP growth is projected at 34.3% in 2024. Yet this administration brazenly allocates a 9% increase, all $3,000. The increase in the income tax threshold from 85,000 to 100,000 that it's supposed to benefit 13,000 workers certainly does not benefit the tens of thousands of Guyanese that work for less than $85,000 a month. 666 billion in infrastructure allocation, or 85,000 of the 1.15 trillion budget, is the most direct form of wealth transfer to the high income supporters of the PPP administration. When PPP ministers get increases of over 200,000 per month, Guyanese earning 100,000 per month get a $6,500 increase. It is repressive, regressive, and a repulsive situation where standard percentage increases are used to expand the wealth gap, particularly the wealth gap. The 2024 pro-poverty voucher budget allocates $3,000 eye care vouchers for school children, 15,000 spectacle vouchers for the general public, and these deliverables, these measures are good. $8,000 for cervical cancer. The 662 billion infrastructure construction transfer is now supplemented with billions for private hospitals, primarily owned by friends of the PPP. It is of concern that women over 65 years of age are not eligible for the cervical cancer voucher. It seems as if the intellectual scientists in the PPP have discovered that women over 65 cannot be diagnosed with cervical cancer. Children who are poor, too poor to go to school, are seemingly ineligible for the eye care voucher. According to Minister Indar, 204 billion has been set aside for roads and bridges for every community, with over 4,000 community roads. All of them, all the highways and byways and bridges we're building. Suffice to say, these are statements with tragic comedic elements. Included in the boil and fry budget, Mr. Singh removes VAT and duties from fire extinguishers, smoke alarms, and sport equipment, and then goes on to downgrade, and twist the meaning of technology. Cell phone accessories such as chargers, charging cables, and headphones, along with components for repairs. This is the full extent of his VAT reduction policy. Value-added tax is the most suffocating tax on the poor introduced by the PPP. And not surprisingly, little is done by the PPP administration to deal with VAT in this pro-poverty budget. The public assistance increased from 16,000 to 19,000, does not provide information on the approximate recipients of the minuscule 3,000 increase. Whenever the PPP administration is thinking of providing for the poor, they seem to think that 3,000 Guyana dollars or 14 US dollars per month is more than enough for those that are impoverished. Mr. Speaker, this is a different time for Guyana, and that's why this budget is so sad. After all our trials and tribulations as a nation, as a country, we finally have the financial resources to do better. The question is, will we? Mr. Speaker, my beef for this 2024 budget is that it's given $1.41 trillion. Too little, may the accountants say just over 1%, is directly reaching the pockets of most of our population. Life is still a struggle to put food on the table, to find shelter for your children, for too many Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, who chooses to squat on land? Who chooses to sleep on the streets? And when we bulldoze their homes and shacks, where do they go? These are the real issues that Budget 2024 provides no real transformation solutions. Mr. Speaker, these are the real issues this government, this budget at this time must address. How to decide on the right balance between investments in infrastructure and more in people's pocket. It's tough decisions on what to put in and what to leave out. And with all due respect to this government, This cannot be achieved when you publicly state your government's policy is not to include the opposition and key civil society groups in the decision-making process. The photo of the four male musketeers huddled around discussing our future, Mr. Speaker, just does not cut it. Mr. Speaker, some of us may be more qualified, just as qualified. Some may be less qualified. But the inclusive democracy of our Constitution in Article 13 demands that we establish must involve all. Government, opposition, private and public sector, civil society, youth, the pensioners, all Guyanese, if we want to develop a strong, secure foundation. This country belongs to us all. Mr. Speaker, a few days ago, several of the ministers ranted about the constitutional violations that plague our society. And I too want to raise the grave omissions in this area, which I had hoped would receive allocations in this budget. The Constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Article 154A, entitles every citizen to the human rights enshrined in the international treaties. And I quote, "Such rights shall be respected and upheld by the executive, legislature, judiciary, and all organs and agencies of government." Mr. Speaker, we Guyanese can access these rights and protections internationally as enshrined under the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women, to which Guyana is a signatory. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, these rights can only be enforced in Guyana if our Human Rights Commission is established as required under our Constitution. This government, although lauding and upholding all the tenets of our Constitution, has consistently and conveniently refused to establish the Human Rights Commission. Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of sharing information on this convention, I quote Article 1. Violence against women shall be understood as any act or conduct based on gender which causes death or physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, whether in public or in the private sphere. End of quote. Mr. Speaker, the incidence of gender-based violence that plagues Guyanese society, and worse, what has taken place most recently, right here in this honorable house, just a few days ago, is testimony of the urgency to correct this omission. Mr. Speaker, I have recently instituted legal proceedings to try and help to force the establishment of the Human Rights Commission and to raise consciousness towards this grave omission. But that's not all, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy that I've gotten this strong, positive outburst and reaction. Mr. Speaker, this is just but one example of the budget's failure to fund key national institutions mandated by a constitution that will safeguard and protect the rights of all citizens. My colleague Christopher Jones provided us with a comprehensive list of similar failures and omissions. So, unfortunately, we see no funds for the Petroleum Commission. But I do want to say, and please correct me, Mr. AG, or anyone if I'm incorrect in that. And I am happy that we do see a 238 million allocation that hopefully will bring the tribunal that governs the Ethnic Relations Commission into being, so they can be more effective. So here is the PPP saying it's committed to the principles of transparency and accountability, but yet 4 years later, you have failed to breathe life into these key institutions. Mr. Speaker, let's face the facts. If the Petroleum Commission was established, we would not have had the nightmare in which one man could take the decision to deprive the citizens of Guyana by moving Exxon's indebtedness from $214 million US to $3 million under the recent audit fiasco. Mr. Speaker, this is precisely why all these outstanding institutions must be established. If we have had a full level audit department, a fully staffed, highly technical accounting department as part of a petroleum commission, this would not have happened. With institutional checks and balances, one man would not have been in the position to make this mistake. Energy and gas to shore. Mr. Speaker, yes, we need cheap energy. But how can we wake up one day and say you need a gas to energy project with no report from any of your national institutions to the opposition MPs saying, this is the feasibility study, these are the pros and cons, this is the cost. Mr. Speaker, how do we have a rational debate in the country when the country doesn't have the capacity to research and assess most of the costs associated with our oil and gas industry? And so, Mr. Speaker, oil and gas, ExxonMobil has stated that they will spend US $1 billion on onshore and offshore pipelines, while the government has contracted a US-based company to build out a facility at Wales for $759 million a cost of US $1.8 billion, all without a secure source of financing and no study or plan. Talk about burdening future generations of Guyanese, while the threat of devouring our national resource funds remains a real possibility if the sourcing for finances for this project falls through or cannot be found. Mr. Speaker, what makes this worse is that the gas to shore is now more expensive than hydropower in the long run. And this is where the requisite studies would have highlighted this. Mr. Speaker, here we're not talking about Amalia, which has a non-expandable catchment area, hence no possibility of increased capacity, but the potential of the Upper Mazaruni, which starts at 750 megawatts, scalable to 1.2 gigawatts. Comparative feasibility studies must be the most prudent approach to determine our energy supply for the future. National development. Mr. Speaker, our primary concern with any budget, much less $1 trillion budget, must be the attention it pays to strategic planning and meeting our national development needs. This is where we hoped we would have seen greater matchmaking, policies, and plans reflected in the budget. We in the APNU plus AFC have articulated this concern, and it is sad that this government has assumed that our concerns are solely of a political nature. This is best seen in the allocation of $4.1 billion to the University of Guyana and $4 billion to the Gold Program. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me explain carefully why I say this, and actually to say that I support education, I support and congratulate everyone that is participating and undergoing training under the Gold Program and also at the University of Guyana. But here is what I want you to consider. The University of Guyana is faced with real costs: building infrastructure, maintenance, wages, salaries for lecturers, admin staff, research and development, and other key expenditures. Contrast this to $4 billion for the Gold Program, which is primarily based on information in the public domain, a virtually based online program, without the heavy burden of massive physical infrastructure and focus on general international courses. And yes, that is the other point. We, at this stage in our development, should be promoting funding for training that directly impacts our country.
Honorable member, at this stage of your presentation, we'll have to get an extension for you to conclude.
Thank you, Minister.
Comrade Speaker, I do move that the honorable member be given 5 minutes to conclude.
You do move or you're begging for?
I do move
Oh, move, sorry.
that the honorable member be given 5 minutes to conclude our presentation.
Thank you, Opposition Chief Whip. Honorable MP, you may start from now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Matching of our human resource needs that are required to drive the oil and gas industry must be our priority. And therefore, the more that we can encourage training and development in areas that impact us. Research and development, for example, we're unique. We are below the sea level. Departments that deal with draining and irrigation must be well financed so that when we're building roads and sea defenses, we must know how it's going to impact on our unique peculiarities. Mr. Speaker, what seems to be lacking in the last few years is the National Development Plan, in which this and previous budgets sit, or the articulation of the development plan if it does exist. Not the manifesto of a political party, or I'm talking about a real national development plan that everyone in the country can follow and support. Mr. Speaker, I am proud and happy of the developments in the tourism industry, and I compliment the private sector. I compliment previous ministers of government. I compliment the current Minister of Tourism in some of the key developments that have taken place. Guyana together over the last 2 decades have worked together to ensure we have a good tourism product. I, however, find it unacceptable that the minister, after close to 2 years, has not been able to institute the Guyana Tourism Authority Board yet. Mr. Speaker, we hear a lot of bantering about British Airways. And I just want to say that in 2015, we went to World Travel Market with an aviation expert contracted by the AFC government, and we met with BA, as it should be. All of us are part of the process. One may start the race, it's up for the country to make sure that somebody completes it. I know I'm out of time, but I certainly want to mention that Mr. Minister of Finance, there's some key criticisms affecting the tourism industry that are still outstanding. The concessions for 4x4 duty-free vehicles that are now, and SUVs are now actually a requirement, not a luxury, to transport visitors in our hinterland areas. We have a challenge with persons. I've received reports of persons that have to apply for a visa if they are not in an area where there's a Guyana representative, foreign affairs representative. And believe it or not, to apply for a visa to visit Guyana, they also have to have a medical. And they have to respond and send a phone call to a government office, to a number that is often not answered. And I know of individuals that have not been able to get their licenses in time. Mr. Speaker, and I think you need to check and you will realize that for tourism, there's some specific requirements. Mr. Speaker, these, as I conclude, these are all some of the recommendations. I'm happy that the Honorable Prime Minister and his ministry are continuing with some of the positive things in the telecommunications sector, including the development of, and I want to mention that we are part of that process. I was very proud to facilitate the subsea cable to Exxon and also to E-Networks. And when I heard the celebration with regard to Shamar Joseph on display last weekend in Australia, and when I read in the backwaters of Barakara, Mr. Speaker, I was happy and proud that the first time Barakara got internet access, to wrap up, I recall, Mr. Speaker, this budget process is testimony, unfortunately, to our failings. For the many long hours, valid recommendations, we no longer possess the capacity to sit around a table and ensure that all views, all hopes, and all aspirations of all Guyanese are reflected in the future that we must build collectively. Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that better will come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. And like you, yes, let's recognize the efforts